Welcome everyone to Israel365 Action's webinar, Arm Yourself to Fight for Israel. Let me just start by thanking you for attending this and for saying yes to being part of the war effort, the war that we're fighting for Israel. I don't have to tell you about the perilous situation that Israel's in. That's why you're here. And the purpose of this session will be for you to learn some important tools about Israel advocacy from our keynote speaker, David Olesker. I'll be introducing him with his bio a little bit later. I'd like to start by calling upon a dear friend of mine to open us up with encouragement and prayer. Pastor Doug Reed is pastor at the Tabernacle Church in Buffalo, New York. He's also my co-host on the Shoulder to Shoulder podcast, which is a weekly podcast that's available on all podcast platforms. Generally, it's devoted to a whole range of issues that impact people of faith. But since the war started, we've been focused on issues that relate to the war, updates about the war, and important talking points and issues that you need to know what's going on. So I highly recommend you adding this to your listening once a week to listen to Shoulder to Shoulder. Without further ado, Pastor Doug, please open us up in prayer.
Thank you, Rabbi Pesach and Israel365 for making this happen. Before I pray, I just want to encourage each one of you that are making time for this event, this training. Israel needs not just allies, but friends. Not just our support, but especially from Christians. We need to stick closer than a brother. I remember Proverbs 17:17 said, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity." Christians, we have been born for this time of adversity. Our Jewish brothers need us now more than ever. Israel needs your voice and your prayers. Like the prophet Isaiah said, I've posted watchmen on your walls of Jerusalem. They will never be silent day or night. You who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest and give him no rest till he establishes Jerusalem and makes her a praise of the earth. Let's take a moment and open this time in prayer. And I know as Christians, we're known for our spontaneous and verbose prayers, but I felt it appropriate under the circumstances to pray Psalm 20. So I'm merely going to read the words of David, and I want us to center our hearts and minds around this psalm with all that's going on in Israel. It says this in Psalm 20, to the chief musician, a psalm of David. May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the God of Jacob defend you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and strengthen you out of Zion. May he remember all your offerings and accept your burnt sacrifice, Selah. May he grant you according to your heart's desire and fulfill all your purpose. We will rejoice in your salvation, and in the name of our God, we will set up our banners. May the Lord fulfill all your petitions. Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. They have bowed down and fallen, but we have risen and stand upright. Save, Lord. May the King answer us when we call. Amen. Amen. Amen.
I'd like to now call upon someone who needs no introduction. She is Dean of the Robertson School of Government at Regent University. She's a former congresswoman, and she's really one of the leaders of the pro-Israel movement among Christians throughout America and throughout the world. Without further ado, Dean Michelle Bachman, could you please share a few words with us today?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I really want to commend everyone that's taken their time to be on this call today. This is our time to show up, arm up, stand up, and be where we need to be to stand with Israel. In our hearts, we have been with Israel, many of us, for many years, and we have read and we've listened and we've prayed and we've gone to Israel. And now we're at a completely different point now. This is an inflection point. The hinge of history is turned. And so now we're all standing up. And we saw the horrible brutality that occurred on October 7th. But immediately, within hours, the propaganda war began. And I spoke with Rabbi Walicki quite early on, is the fact that the narrative had changed. And the narrative had changed so that it was meant to be that, again, Israel's the oppressor and the Arab marauders are the victims. It's the same thing that happens all the time. Here in the United States, we're hearing this out of our own president. We heard it out of the United Nations Director General, Antonio Guterres. He made an absolutely inflammatory statement where essentially his remarks were this. It was, well, Israel deserves it. Israel created the conditions for her to be slaughtered. It was absolutely, for a man who's supposed to be a chief international diplomat, he's a disgrace and he should resign. And that's one message that I would advocate, that we all call on the Director General of the United Nations to resign. He clearly has taken sides in this manner, and he is on the side of those who are the perpetrators, the terrorists. So it's important, I think, to call him out. And it isn't a misspeaking. He read off of notes. This is what he thinks. Here in the United States, the President of the United States, clearly either the best case scenario is that Joe Biden is ignorant of the issues in Israel. That's the best case scenario. But he has been calling that the incursion hasn't even started into Gaza. And our president is already talking about ceasefire. He's already talking about a two-state solution afterwards. This is clearly insane, the rantings that are coming out of our president. I say that with all due respect. These are rantings. No one in their right mind who knows the facts or the history or the international law or the legal basis and jurisdiction for Israel's presence exactly where she is would say the things that have come out of the mouth of the president of the United States. This morning, the first article I read really had me perplexed. The president was saying something about Jewish settlers in settlements in Judea, Samaria, who had attacked Palestinians. And I thought, that doesn't sound right. So I called some of my friends that live in Samaria. I asked them what was going on. They said, yeah, that was a typical Arab terrorist attacker who was going out to the edge of the Arab portion of the land, he was going toward a Jewish community. And so a Jewish gentleman came out and an IDF officer came out. And so the Arab was disabled from doing anything. And that's what it was. That's what happened. But our president takes that incident that was being perpetrated by the Arab who was living in it was actually Samaria, that he was saying that was actually a Jewish, someone who's a settler. First of all, there aren't settlements in Judea, Samaria. Judea, Samaria is Israel's land, and there are Jewish communities. There are 200 Jewish communities, about 500,000 Jews live in that area. There's 500,000, there's about 300,000 in the Judea, Jerusalem area. So this is where the Jewish people live. This is the biblical heartland. And so our president is getting it wrong over and over and over again. Because of technology and because a lot of people are waking up to this issue in a way that they hadn't woke up before, I really do think that we have a tremendous opportunity to cut through the decades of propaganda against Israel. When we didn't have the internet, when we didn't have cell phones so we could talk to each other instantaneously or ways to look up articles immediately, we were at a disadvantage to have our facts right. Today, our facts are front and center. And so we can easily, I believe, we can win this narrative war for Israel if we get our facts right, and they're not tough to get, the facts. We can get this summarized, and then we need to arm young people, churches, just find a group of people And we need to arm them with information, great information. And then we just have to not be intimidated. That's the other thing that's happening right now, the intimidation, so that those who love Israel, who stand for Israel, who believe in the truth, quite frankly, will be silent and not speak. And they're using very ancient tactics of intimidation, and it's violence. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing rhetoric to incite violence, and then we're seeing violence. So the demonstrations, for instance, on college campuses and the demonstrations in our streets. I'll give you one example. I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where there was a huge demonstration of those who support Hamas and support the terrorists and their agenda for Jewish genocide. Ultimately, this is about Jewish genocide. That's what this is about. So these people were out in favor of Jewish genocide. They shut down the main streets in downtown Minneapolis. An elderly man in his car found himself in that blockade. He was completely disoriented. They tried to pull him out of his car, pepper sprayed him. He was disoriented. He broke away, drove to the next checkpoint. And these pro-genocide protesters were kicking his car and chasing after him. It was a very violent, terrible situation, and they wanted to hurt him. That's what it was. So it isn't just Minneapolis. It's all over the United States. And they were, by the way, racing around on motorcycles on highways in Minneapolis after closing down the public highways with a Hamas flag. So at that point, we need to just slow down for a minute. At that point, this isn't free speech. The exercise of free speech stops in the United States when you are advocating for violence and the violent overthrow of the United States government, because that's what this comes down to. They want to overthrow not just Israel and kill Jews. They want to overthrow the United States government and install their form of a caliphate. That's how far down the road this is. And so our public officials, beginning with the President of the United States, doesn't have the most basic understanding of what even the terms of disagreement are, with the terms of advocacy for war. And so I think that's why I'm so grateful for Rabbi Walicki and Rabbi Tuli Wise and Israel365.com, because this is an effort to bring Jews, Christians, all people together to be united. We're seeing that now, efforts to unite people rather than divide people. We want to unite. We're uniting about something that is great, and that's Israel. Israel in the Bible was created by God. He brought a people to a specific land, Genesis 15:18, for a purpose. And the purpose is that Israel would become a blessing to all families on earth. Israel is a blessing. So we want to agree with God and obey his word, and agree that we need to be about supporting the covenant people of God that are eternal, that will always be there. And we need to support them and lift them up, because that is a blessing to all families on earth. I'm extremely grateful to be a part of this. There's so many aspects. People will be talking about the geopolitical. I've talked just a little bit about the biblical, but also the narrative war. And here in the United States, I've been trying to be very active in speaking to churches and in speaking to organizations and going on the radio and telling the basic facts about what's at play here. And I think this is where we need to call out, as I said, the UN General Director, Guterres, for his lies, for saying that it's Israel that actually instituted its own slaughter, and call for his resignation. But also the President of the United States, Joe Biden, he has to be responsible for what he's spouting. He can't just be given a pass because of dementia. He has to be held accountable, and the administration has to be accountable. And I think, honestly, this is the greatest opportunity that we have, as I said earlier, for cutting through the propaganda that has held us down for decades. And so I think this is the moment. This is the moment when we can get rid of the propaganda and tell the truth about the people of Israel, the land of Israel, and the future of Israel. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dean Bachman, and thank you also on a personal level for your responsiveness and your support and your friendship. Since the war began, we've been talking every day. We've been pushing forward, and I absolutely feel that the wind is at our backs, that God is with us. The fact that 2 weeks ago, a gathering like this, the infrastructure wasn't even in place, and now we have 150 people who, in the middle of a day, in America, for where most of our participants are, taking out time to learn about how to arm themselves to fight for Israel is just remarkable. It's miraculous, and it's only the beginning. I've said many times over the last few days in groups that I've spoken to, and I've been speaking to especially to Christian audiences, that the Christian world, and I know that our audience today is made up of Jews and Christians, and that's so important that we have to be working together, and we're all in this fight together. But the Christians have something that the Jewish people could never have, and that's numbers. I'm talking in terms of, real practicals. Christians have numbers, and the information war that we are in, and it is a brutal information war, is a war, especially the war on social media, is a war of numbers. So again, thank you, Dean Bachman, and all those who are plugged in today. This is only the first of many events. And we're going to be in touch with you. We're going to be giving you information and tasks and homework to do so that we can continue to fight this battle. It is my honor to welcome to Israel365 Action's webinar on how to arm yourself for Israel. My honor to welcome member of Knesset Sharon Haskell. She's a member of Knesset for the National Unity Party and one of the important young leaders in the Jewish people today. Member of Knesset Haskell, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for everybody who joined us. I'm not sure exactly how it works here and how this platform works, but I'll tell you a little bit about where we're at and maybe some of the things that we're very worried about. I can see here some of the things that you're writing as well. So if there's any questions also I'll try and also answer while I'll speak. So we had here in Israel one of the most vicious attacks, murderous attack. I think it's one of our worst. It is the worst attack that we've had through the entire history of Israel. That was thousands of terrorists, Hamas terrorists, who charged the border, infiltrated and invaded 22 towns and cities, going from house to house, massacring entire families. The sights are horrific. I was there last week with a delegation of a few ambassadors that came to see it firsthand to really understand what had happened there. And I am personally still recovering from the sights, from the smell, from everything that we saw and heard that had happened there. This attack by Hamas was an attack that was planned quite a lot in advance. It was planned, financed, and the entire footprints of Iran is set straight on this attack. I think that probably in history, we will remember this event as probably the first day of the war of Iran. Iran is well known to use proxies around the world. Hamas is being used as one of its proxies at the moment as well. And I know that probably most of the people here are well informed of everything that is happening, and you consume the media and the news and everything that's been happening. And so you understand that our goal is to eliminate Hamas. Israel is bordering in an autonomy that is ruled and governed by an ISIS-like organization and a Nazi organization that their only goal is to murder as many Jews as possible. It is written in their treaty that one of their first goals is to completely eliminate the state of Israel. It goes hand in hand with some of Iran's goal that they've been declaring throughout the years. And when we look on this conflict, be sure that this is not another event or another round between Hamas and Israel. This is far bigger. And it has two main scenarios. The first one, that it stays in somewhat a front between Hamas and a little bit of Hezbollah as well. But it doesn't look like it. Hamas has called on a national, international jihad, meaning they are calling everyone possible, everyone that wants to participate in jihad, to go out and start attacking. It's not just Israel, but it's through the entire world. We've seen a few vicious attacks in Europe, France, London. There were a terrorist attack in Brussels, in Belgium. And there was also a vicious attack on one of the heads of the synagogues in the States. We see what's happening in campuses. Campuses are not safe anymore for Jewish students. I just went through some videos of today campuses. Some attackers, pro-Palestinians, have actually had a few Jewish students locked at the library, incapable of actually living it, screaming. I mean, it goes through all campuses, all schools. My niece is studying in a public school in Texas. She's only 8 years old, and sitting in her lunch time around the table, there was one boy who screamed, "I'm going to kill all Jews." Now, they are 8 years old. What we are seeing is probably the start of that clash of civilization. It is far bigger, and it has nothing to do with a territorial conflict. It has an aspect, in a way, that Muslim says that no one is allowed to hold any Muslim land. And the idea about completely annihilating the state of Israel is that no Jews are allowed to hold any kind of Muslim land. And that's how they consider it, and that's how they justify the murder of Jews. In a bigger scale, we see already at least 10 army bases in Iraq, American bases, that were attacked. We see the Houthis sending missiles from Yemen. We see Hezbollah every single day trying to attack Israel through our northern borders. So you understand that Iran is using all of its proxies in order to try and get that into a regional conflict. Now, we knew that would come at a certain point, and Iran in recent years was able to accumulate more weapons and more power, and it's strong. And right now, we are waiting from the sources that we were told with the entrance into Gaza, so that the American troops will be ready all around in the Middle East as well for any kind of aggression or attack or act by Iran as well. So we need to understand that this context and this conflict is becoming a wide scale of a conflict of radical Islam against the free world, meaning that this Hamas attack was the first attack on our values, on our way of life, on our beliefs. Freedom, democracy, equality, freedom of religion, women's right, the sanctity of life. Those values, mutual values that we share, were attacked, were called up on a war by extremism, by extreme Muslims. And this sort of clash of civilization that is starting now, Israel is the front, but they are already knocking on your doors as well, in Europe, in America, in Canada. Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, and Iran had Hezbollah had one of its biggest headquarters in Canada until it was shut down. I think it was about 15 years ago. They are well based in Central and South America. They are the biggest importer and exporter of weapons and drugs. And that's all in the control of Iran. And so when you see now those pro-Palestinians demonstrations in your streets, in your cities, in your schools, you know that these are supporters of a massacre, of an ISIS group, of that radical idea that Islam needs to control the world. And it is time for people, many silent people who never wanted to get involved. This is the point where everybody have to get involved. Everybody have to speak out, because this is a war on the way we live, on our values, on our beliefs, on our religion.
David Olesker is the founder and director of the Jerusalem Center for Communications and Advocacy Training, JCCAT. He was born in Britain in 1957. He studied at Sunderland Polytechnic College, and after his Aliyah in 1982 at Yeshiva Or Sameach in Jerusalem. Hold on a second, I just made a mistake. In Jerusalem. After moving to Israel, he worked with the World Zionist Organization's Educational Resource Center for 6 years, where he helped pioneer the application of informal education techniques to training advocates for Israel. In 1989, he founded JCCAT, an independent organization to bring these techniques to a wider audience, and continues to do so to this day. David Olesker travels frequently to the United States and other countries to teach Israel advocacy skills to students and Jewish community activists and staffs of Jewish organizations. He has done this work with Israel's diplomats, with emissaries of the World Zionist Organization and Jewish Agency, and the staffs of such organizations as the Anti-Defamation League, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, and student and community activists from 5 continents. He's married with 9 children, which makes him a fanatic, because I have 8, and if you have more kids than me, you're nuts. And I also want to say that those of you who know me, and many of our audience knows me or has heard me speak over the years, and I want you to know that I've known David Olesker for about 30 years. And when I was early in my career in communication as a rabbi and as an activist, he was one of my mentors who I learned from about this work and about best practices and techniques for defending Israel. And it was without any hesitation that I called upon him for this lofty task of training an army who will fight the information war for us. So without further ado, my dear friend, David Olesker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've often wondered what it would be like to have further ado. I've never seen any further ado. I'd like to experience it at least once just to know what it is. I'm very grateful to Rabbi Pesach to have invited me here. And I'm very grateful to all of you to give up your time. It shows your commitment to trying to get out the truth about Israel. And what I would like to do tonight, as you can see from the window behind me, it's tonight my time here in Jerusalem. What I would like to do in this session is to, rather than deal very much with the specifics of exactly what's happening at the moment, I'd like to look at some very basic techniques about Israel advocacy. And we'll talk about how you apply them into the specific situation that's going on right now. Unfortunately, this is not my first rodeo. There's anti-Israel rhetoric has been the soundtrack to my life for more than 40 years. So let's try and get a bit of perspective. We're going to talk about, as I said, the very, very basic things. Like, what is Israel advocacy? That sounds like it's obvious to everyone. I don't think it is obvious to everyone. Is it education? Are we trying to educate people about Israel? I'm going to be very frank with you. We're not. Education requires depth, it requires thought, it requires investment of time and effort. You need to be educated. If you're going to be an advocate for Israel, you need to be educated about Israel. But you cannot demand from everybody that you're interacting with that they be as educated as you are. So it's not going to be education. So if it's not education, is it going to be propaganda? Well, I hope not. In fact, I know it's not, because really the theorists of propaganda point out that it's really only possible to have propaganda in a totalitarian society where the government controls all sources of information, somewhere like North Korea or Gaza. Because then the propagandist is able to present their point of view without any alternative voice. So what you have instead in a Western society is advocacy. Think about a place where you might see advocacy. You might sit in a courtroom. In a Western courtroom, you have an advocate for one side, an advocate for the other, and you have a judge to keep everybody in line. This is a bit like that, only instead of having a judge, it's more like a bar fight. There's nobody who's keeping anybody in line, but we are in an open society where anybody can say anything, and people will. As you probably gathered from my accent, I'm a recovering Englishman. I've actually lived in Israel most of my life, but the accent doesn't go away. And I grew up with the BBC. The BBC has become proverbial in its bias against Israel, and often against Jews as well. You can't stop them from saying what they're saying. Even in a country like Britain, which doesn't have a First Amendment, you cannot steal the anti-Jewish voices. All you can do is make sure you are a better advocate than they are. So how do you do that? So I caution my students, first and foremost, to be a Jew, if they are one. Because if you think about almost any public controversy, something happening in India, for example, right? There's, if anybody from Canada here knows that there are controversies between Canada and India at the moment over Sikh nationalism. Well, if you want to know about Sikh nationalism, the most obvious thing to do would be to ask a Sikh. In fact, that's what the media does. If they want to know what Sikh nationalists think, they'll find a Sikh nationalist and they'll ask him, and they may ask for a counter voice. But for some reason, Jews feel a little bit uncomfortable about saying, well, I'm a Jew, and I'm going to tell you what I feel like as a Jew. And it's a mistake. We can speak with the voice of authenticity, with the voice of direct experience. And that is something that the world respects. And our voice of authenticity and experience will be respected if we respect ourselves. Now, I know that a good number of the people involved in this webinar are not Jewish. That doesn't mean that you can't talk with authenticity as well. As we're going to see, we're going to talk about other things that allow you to speak with authenticity. But for the Jews out there, don't be afraid to say, I'm a Jew. This is how I feel as a Jew. This is what this means to me as a Jew. And let people hear that. Don't be ashamed of it. I was speaking once in a live presentation a few years ago in Britain. And one lady asked me, said, well, what do you do when people you work with make anti-Semitic comments in front of you? I said, well, personally, I don't let on that I'm Jewish. Some of us can pass. Some of us can't. And none of us should be trying to. Now, I'm talked about education in contrast to advocacy. Dean Bachman talked about having your facts, and she's absolutely right. You have to have your facts. Without information, you cannot make a case. But information is such a precious commodity that it has to be rationed. The classic Israeli media response used to be, we're going over to the Israeli spokesman now. Yes, to understand our situation, we have to begin before 3,000 years. And, first of all, it's hard to understand what he's saying. And secondly, the moment people hear 3,000 years, they turn off. They're not listening any longer. So you have to ration information. You have to understand how much your audience can cope with, and you have to give them as much as they can deal with, and no more than that, no less either. We live in a world where people communicate visually, and it's hugely important that you communicate visually, that you use pictures, that you use cartoons. They're a great resource. Use maps, use diagrams, use videos. This is an example that I used recently. I was speaking to a group from the UK. Here, how big is Israel? I was once on a plane flying into Chicago, and I struck a conversation with the gentleman sitting next to me. He was actually very pro-Israel, and we had a very interesting conversation. And he somewhat shamefacedly said to me, I'm embarrassed to say this, but how big is Israel? And I said, we're flying into Chicago. I said, well, let me put it this way. Israel would fit inside Lake Michigan, and there are people who would like to put it there. Most people measure the assumed size of a country based on the amount of media time it has. So therefore, Israel is about the same size as Russia. Only it's not. So you put it on a map like this, or you put it on a map of the United States, so you can see it's smaller than New York State. And suddenly it gives people a vivid sense of reality that they just wouldn't have otherwise. Here it is in relation to New York State. Pictures can be more dramatic. Here's your local neighborhood, local government officer in Gaza demonstrating a persuasive argument to Gazan citizens. This is not what people are seeing on the news at the moment. You have to give them the pictures that other people are not giving them. Luckily, we live in an age where this kind of material is very easily available via the internet. I'll send you some by email. We'll send you some resources, some places where you can get materials like this from, and you'll get that by email after the webinar. I mentioned cartoons. Cartoons are a great way of getting a point across very briefly, very strikingly. I don't know if you can make this out, but there's two ladies saying, and there's my youngest son, Hakeem, he'll be martyring in the fall. The other one wonders, yes, they blow up so fast. Laura asked, where do you find prose or cartoons? I will, as I say, supply this email with some sources afterwards. One of the things that we tend to do is, again, get stuck on facts, information, and we forget that people aren't just heads, they're also hearts. And if you want to engage somebody's head, the way to do it is through the heart. You have to use emotion. I happened to see a couple of days ago an astonishing story from the initial attacks. Again, I'll post it for you afterwards, but an older gentleman in one of the communities near Gaza sent his children and grandchildren into a safe room. He's an old man, a sick old man, and he sat in his easy chair in his living room waiting for the terrorists to turn up, correctly assessing that they would walk into the house and see a lonely old man, assume he was alone, and kill him, and then leave, which is what happened. And he gave up his life to save his offspring. Now, I think that's an incredibly moving story, and I think the man deserves to be recognized as a hero he is. And it's a way of engaging people in the reality of what happened in Gaza in a way that statistics just can't do. So I want to move on to another very important topic in terms of the way advocacy works, and it's what we call conceptual framing. When I was a kid growing up in Britain, there was an ad for a painkiller. It was basically a name brand form of aspirin. And its claim in its advertising was, nothing acts faster than this particular brand of aspirin. And when challenged on it, they claimed that scientific tests proved that, in fact, the claim was correct. And it was correct. But as my father of blessed memory used to say, well, if nothing acts faster than Anodin, this particular brand, then I'm going to take nothing. Aspirin is aspirin is aspirin. It all works exactly the same way. And the fact that your brand, you're pushing it by saying nothing acts faster than this particular brand is true because they all work at the same speed. That's an example of what's called conceptual framing. If you frame the issue in terms of which brand works fastest, then the answer will be they're all the same. If you frame it in terms of, well, nothing acts faster than my brand, then you create the impression that your brand is superior. Now, conceptual framing is used in almost every form of persuasion, and we're going to look at how we can apply it to Israel advocacy. First and foremost, initiate. I was in South Africa a good few years ago, and they introduced me to a group that they'd set up called the Media Response Group. And they asked me, do I have any advice? I said, well, first piece of advice I would give you would be change your name. You don't want a media response. You want to initiate. You want other people to have to respond to you. That gives you the advantage. Otherwise, if I'm using the correct football nomenclature, you're continually playing catch up. You have to be willing to initiate discourse about Israel. And when you initiate it, then other people are inside your conceptual frame. And if they're inside your conceptual frame, it gives you an inbuilt advantage. It's not easy to do. People feel intimidated. Why should I get into a confrontation with somebody? It doesn't need to be confrontational. I just got back a couple of days ago from a trip to Britain, not for advocacy work. I'd actually gone to see my nephew get married, thank God. But I was in a taxi and I was chatting with the taxi driver, and he says to me, "So, are you from Israel?" And I said, yeah. He said, "What's it like there?" And I said, "Well, it's never boring. And I can tell you, I wish it was." And that, simply just saying a fairly neutral thing initiated a discussion with him, which ended up being very positive towards Israel. And he expressed positive feelings towards Israel. It'd be much harder to do that if the other person initiates, which happened to me in a different taxi when a Moroccan Arab initiated conversation with me about the Israeli bombings. So what do you do if somebody else initiates? I'll talk about it. If you initiate, if you propose the conceptual frame that we're going to discuss in, then you face a lighter burden of proof than the one who challenges it. If you present a simple frame, well, Israel can't be expected to live with barbaric terrorism on a day-to-day basis. Israel has to be able to defend itself. then responding to that requires a more complex argument than the one I've just given. That's why initiating is so important, and it gives you such a built-in advantage. Another crucial way in which conceptual frames are set is through language, what you call things. Here are some examples of how language can be used to create a conceptual frame. Are you letting people go, or are you cutting jobs? Are you enhancing competitiveness, or are you cutting wages? Everyone wants to be a volunteer. Nobody wants to be an unpaid worker. And all of these examples can be applied to the discourse around Israel. So if you are talking about the apartheid war, you've already lost. If you're talking about an illegal settlement, you've already lost. So use other language. Control language. Control what you call something defines what it is. And no offense to my fellow Israeli, MK Haskell, who was just on, but it's very easy to slip into this. Are those horrific demonstrations of support for genocide, can they be called pro-Palestinian demonstrations? I don't think they can. I think they need called anti-Israel presentations, demonstrations. Let's call things what they are. Let's not call them an earth-moving implement. Let's call a spade a spade. People who are running around university campuses in North America and Europe and saying that Hamas has a point are exactly the equivalent of people who don't dress up in white sheets themselves, but nonetheless support the Ku Klux Klan. That is the message that we have to get across to people. We can't get across to people unless we call things what they really are. So here's some examples of negative language and positive language that we can use to talk about the situation. I actually got this from an anti-Israel publication, and I just copied it into Word and switched the columns around. They said, do say anti-apartheid wall, don't say anti-terror barrier. So I just switched them around. Look, let's take an issue that divides many Americans, the issue of abortion. Have you ever met anyone who says that they're pro-abortion? I'm sure you haven't. Such a person doesn't seem to actually exist. No one's pro-abortion, they're pro-choice. And if they're pro-choice and you disagree with them, then you must be anti-choice. And of course, you can flip the thing the other way as well. Who wants to be anti-life? And what you call something determines what it is. And if you can't get control of the nomenclature, then you're not going to win the argument. Going back to what I mentioned earlier about engaging emotions, tell stories. I was on a talk radio show years ago in the United States, and I mentioned to the host of the show who was interviewing him, I said that, I at that time it was true. I did reserve duty in the Israeli army. I got this white beard. I don't do it any longer. They'll call me up after women and children. But at the time it was true. I used to do reserve duty in the Israeli army. And I said to him, once a year, myself and my fat, middle-aged Jewish colleagues get called to the army. And it would be funny if it wasn't so serious, because we are called up to do what those rescue workers were doing on 9/11. It's our job to go into damaged buildings and pull out the casualties and recover the dead. We're in what's called the Home Front Command in Israel, the civil defense. That was my job in the army. And it's a piece of self-deprecating humor. I'm a fat old Jew. What kind of army calls up someone like me? An army that has to face genocidal threats. And once you have mentioned a personal story that crystallizes the idea, then you can back it up with information and statistics. Don't go overboard. Remember, information has to be rationed. But, there are X thousands of people like me at the moment who have been called up into the Israeli army, including my son-in-law. My daughter, who's been married for 2 years, is moved in with us because her husband, my son-in-law, has been called up to the army. I can't say where or what he's doing, except to say that he's in a combat unit. And of course, we're concerned about him and we're concerned about her. And what have I just done? This is no longer a statistic. This is no longer a fact. It's a person. And you care about people, and everybody cares about people. And that's the power of telling a story. Use humor or derision. The late Robin Williams was once interviewed on a German talk show, and his host apparently asked him, "Mr. Williams, they say we Germans have a problem with humor. Why do you think that is?" And Robin Williams, to his eternal credit, responded, "Perhaps it's because you've killed all the funny people." It's one of the things that we Jews are supposed to have a reputation for is being funny. So use humor. Use humor. It can be gallows humor. I was interviewed on the BBC just days after the massacre. And of course, they asked me about the issue of proportionality. Do you think what Israel is doing in Gaza is proportionate? I said, no, it's not. It's not proportionate, and it shouldn't be proportionate, because if we're going to be proportionate, we would have to send soldiers from house to house to cut off babies' heads. No, it's not going to be proportionate. Don't expect it to be proportionate. I'm deriding the idea of proportionality in this context. We can talk about it in a more serious vein, perhaps another session, or perhaps in the Q&A. But be sure to make fun of things that don't deserve to be taken seriously. Talk about what's important to your audience. People in the United States are sometimes criticized for having a narrow viewpoint, only thinking about themselves and their country. If you live in a country that really doesn't have much control or influence in the world, then you think about the whole world. If you live in a powerful country, then you think about your own country. If you live in a country like Israel, then you think about all the countries who would like to get rid of your country. But Americans want to know, yes, of course what Hamas did was disgusting and horrible, but why is it my fight? Why is it important to me? Why should my tax dollars go to Israel? And those are questions you have to have an answer to, and there are answers to them. I'll send you materials by mail afterwards. This is not reinventing the wheel, but say things that are important to your audience. If you're talking to a Christian audience, don't be afraid to invoke the Bible. If you're talking to a secular audience, don't be afraid to invoke the Bible, but be willing to say other things as well. Make sure that you say things that your audience can relate to. I was speaking on a college campus once in the United States, and group of black Muslims walked in. I'd been warned about them in advance. They came in as a body, obviously an attempt to intimidate me as a pro-Israel speaker. I pointed out to them that I had 9 children. It takes a lot to intimidate me. I continued in my presentation. One of the things I mentioned in my presentation was the way in which the media gets everything wrong, but we only notice it when it's our issue that goes wrong. And if you, I told them a story about being in a taxi in New York. Taxi driver asked me a question about Israel, and I took a look at his name tag. If you know a bit about world culture, you can make a good guess at where someone's from based on their name. So I looked at his name and I said, well, yeah, Mr. Ogembo, I wouldn't believe everything you read in the newspapers and see on television about Israel. I mean, just look at the way they report on Nigeria, for example. I couldn't get another word in edgeways. The guy starts ranting and raving. Oh, the media in this country is in the pay of my country's enemies, only ever tells lies about my country. And I let him, rant and rave for a couple of minutes. I said, well, you know what? It's the same thing about Israel. And suddenly he was willing to accept it. So talk about what your audience can relate to. If you're talking to a liberal audience, talk about the way in which Hamas persecutes political dissidents and people who don't toe their interpretation of religious law. If you're talking to liberals, ask them, are they actually in favor of throwing homosexuals off the roofs of buildings? Because that's what Hamas does. If you're talking to a conservative group, then, talk to them about the persecution of Christians. M.K. Haskell mentioned attacks on Christians. The Middle East is not a safe place for Christians today. And I'm often astonished that our Christian friends are not running riot in the street in outrage about what is being done to Christians. Perhaps a little more outrage would be a good idea. But talk to people about things that matter to them rather than what matters to me. Because the business of advocacy is about convincing other people. I don't need to convince myself. Let's talk about responding. You can't always take the initiative. Sometimes you're caught unaware. Especially true on college campuses where the whole environment is so stacked against supporters of Israel. Very often you're hit with a stream of accusations, and it's very intimidating. Never be intimidated by a stream of accusations, because the more arguments they throw at you gives you more options to choose which one to attack. And you only have to show one of their arguments is demonstrably false or clearly malicious, and it's destroyed their credibility. So don't be afraid of somebody who comes, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about that? Just keep note of what they're saying and wait for the thing that you can nail them on. I spoke on a campus once in Britain, and an Arab student said, how can you accuse me of being anti-Semitic? I am Semitic myself, so I cannot be anti-Semitic. So, it was a gift from heaven. I said, well, I'm so grateful to you for pointing out that you couldn't possibly be anti-Semitic, because if you hadn't, then I think myself and a lot of other people here might have made the mistake of thinking you really were anti-Semitic, given all the hateful things you just said. But I think I should point out to you that the word anti-Semitism has nothing to do with Semitic languages, Semitic nations. It was a word that was coined by the 19th century German anti-Semite Wilhelm Marr, because he wanted a pseudo-scientific term, and Jew hater didn't do it enough. Anti-Semitic has never meant anything other than hating Jews. And when you demonstrate you don't understand that term, are you demonstrating that you're ignorant or you're being malicious? Which is it? What have I just done? I've wrested back control of the conceptual frame. And the guy gave me the ammunition to shoot him with. Something I mentioned in passing, beware of entering your opponent's conceptual frame. Well, Israel is not as bad as you think it is. Don't get trapped into that kind of thing, because it doesn't take you anywhere. Even when you win, you lose, because if you say a very, very basic point in terms of conceptual framing. The basic conceptual frame that the anti-Israel advocates are trying to push is Israel is the problem in the Middle East. That's it. That's the frame that they've created. Inside that frame, Israel is the problem. I will not get into that. Israel is not the problem in the Middle East. Israel's a solution. It was not Israelis who cost thousands of lives on 9/11. It was not Israelis who blew up London transport. It wasn't Israelis who sent suicide bombers into the capitals of Europe. Israel isn't the problem in the Middle East. Israel's the only functioning democracy in the Middle East. It's the only country in the Middle East where Muslims, Jews, and Christians have equal rights. Israel's not the problem. Israel's a solution. Never allow yourself to get caught inside the other guy's conceptual frame. And the easiest way to do that is by echoing the language they use. That's why I mentioned earlier, language is so important instead of the conceptual frame. Even if you're refuting, if they say Israel's apartheid, you say Israel's not apartheid because apartheid means this, and Israel's not apartheid because of that. Every time you repeat the word apartheid, you're amplifying and magnifying their statement, and that's what people remember. When you negate a frame, it evokes the frame. So just try and stay away from the other guy's frame. So there are three basic strategies. If you are caught in a situation where you can't initiate, there are three basic strategies for responding. Again, speaking on college campuses, this was before everyone had the internet. I would desperately try and check the news. Those days you had to do it via shortwave radio from Israel before I went on to speak anywhere. Because who knows what someone's going to throw at you from the audience. A guy says, my cousin in Abu Nowhere was just chopped up and turned into shish kebab by Israeli soldiers. What do you say about that? And I have nothing to say because I have no idea whether it's happened or not, whether it's a distortion or not, whether he's taken a real incident and is blowing up out of proportion. So my standard response is, well, I can't answer that question because I don't have information on it. Let me say this. So you can avoid somebody's question if you can give a reasoned excuse for not having to discuss it. Important point, let me digress for a second. I say a reasoned excuse, a justifiable excuse. Justifiable to who? If you are in an interaction with a real dedicated anti-Israel advocate, nothing you are going to say is going to convince them. And so, what should you engage with them at all? I mean, if you're just in an elevator with a guy who is, rabidly anti-Israel, should you even engage in a discussion with them? I would say not. You'd say, I'm afraid we're going to have to respectfully disagree. Or if it's me, I'll tell him exactly where he can put his views about Israel, but without the use of lubricant. But that's me. You don't have to do that. What if you encounter the rabid anti-Israel person in front of other people? either on social media or in a social setting in real life, they are arguing for the uncommitted people, and you have to as well. So if you want to, for example, avoid answering a question, then you have to make a justification that seems reasonable to the people listening, not to the person you're arguing with. Try, if possible, it's much stronger, to refute an accusation somebody uses. Again, on a campus debate, someone, the late Ariel Sharon, someone accused him of being a terrorist, having belonged to a Jewish terrorist organization. I simply pointed out that, he had an alibi. He was actually not in the Egon Lomé. He wasn't in what the British called the Stern Gang. He was a member of the Palmach. And therefore, your accusation that he couldn't, that he was a member of a Jewish terrorist organization, falls on that fact. Now, so let me go back to refutation for a second. What makes something an effective refutation? Someone, in the eyes of the observers, is successfully refuted if you bring a proof from a generally accepted source of information. So if you say, well, yeah, just look on Wikipedia, for 99% of people, that's like it came down on Mount Sinai. If you tell somebody, well, if something that again happened in a campus debate I was in, somebody quoted a famous New York Times article about Israeli soldiers using their M16 rifles to shoot Palestinian Arab children for sport. And this New York Times reporter said that they were using silenced M16 rifles. And the eerie situation that he viewed of them firing and Palestinian Arab children falling down dead in complete silence was horrifying. So my interlocutor quoted from this New York Times article. I said, well, I think we're on a university campus here. Can someone send for somebody from the physics department? Because what has just been described here is a physical impossibility. The M16 fires a supersonic round. It makes a sonic boom as it passes through the air. There is no such thing as a silenced M16. It's a physical impossibility. So what has just been claimed is by definition untrue. And I'll leave you to judge the veracity of the rest of their claims based on that. So that's one way of refuting something. You quote from an acceptable source that shows what's being said is untrue. The other way, which is perhaps even more effective, is the argument against it. If you can quote a Hamas spokesman saying that, there are no civilians here, there are only traitors, or something like that. I don't know if they said this time round, but they've certainly said it in the past. Then, of course you're going to believe them when they say that, because it would help them if they said the opposite. So the argument against interest is a very, very effective refutation. So you've refuted something, or you've avoided something, but that just gets you out of trouble. You still want to keep control of the conceptual frame. You still want to advance your argument. So the most effective form of refutation is what's called bridging. I was in Baltimore, Maryland once, and I was doing a presentation for the local Jewish community. And like half a dozen local Muslim Arabs turned up for the event, which made it very interesting. And I was explaining this particular technique, and I said, well, let's have an example. Somebody throw an anti-Israel accusation at me, and I'll show you what to do with it. So one of the Arabs in the audience says, the conflict is the result of illegal Israeli settlements. So I said, okay, great. So let's take that one step at a time. Let's start with the refutation. When you talk about illegal Israeli settlements, you're talking about things after 1967, right? But the conflict existed before 1967. So obviously it can't be the result of things that happened after 1967. So clearly what you just said is wrong. And I explained to the audience that's a refutation. That's a clear refutation. But now I want to get on to what I want to talk about. So now I use a bridge. A bridge is a form of words that takes me into my conceptual framework. So if it's not a result of Israeli settlements, then what is this conflict caused by? And before I could say another word, the Arab gentleman in the audience who had spoken earlier said, the cause of the conflict is the existence of the state of Israel. And I said, thank you very much. If you can ever get any of them to say that, then you've won the argument. And he did the goldfish impersonation. He went, because he just said, what he thought was a clincher argument, and it destroyed him. Because he revealed his own extremism in front of an audience that didn't like extremism. So those are the basic three methods of responding to somebody else's point. Avoid it if you have to, refute it if you can, and always try and bridge into your own conceptual frame. So I want to just wrap up and talk about one point in particular that I saw come up in the chat. A lady called Cindy Offenstein, I think. Did I get your name right? Said, should you get pro-Israel stickers for your cars? Should you fly Israeli flags? And I would say a resounding yes. There's something that we talk about in, we can take down the PowerPoint now, Aaron, if that's okay. There's something we talk about in persuasion theory, which is called spiral of silence. If you are in an environment where a particular point of view is unpopular, then you will feel the need to self-censor. You'll feel uncomfortable raising the unpopular view, unless you're very motivated and very committed. And the less you mention it, the less it gets heard, the more unpopular it is, and the less people are willing to mention it. That's why it's called the spiral of silence. Now, one of the ways of breaking out of the spiral of silence is to get yourself into a subgroup in which that point of view is in fact popular. It strengthens you. It reminds you that you're not alone. And that's why it's very, very, very important to spend time with other supporters of Israel, to go to events that support Israel, and not just online events, but physical events where you mingle with other people and let them see you. Every time a supporter of Israel sees a car drive by with an Israeli flag on it, with a pro-Israel sticker on it, it makes them feel that they're not alone. I mentioned I was just in the UK. I was there for my nephew's wedding. I came out of a train station in a city called Leeds. I was waiting for my Uber, and a gentleman comes up to me. I'm 99.9% certain he wasn't Jewish. And he walks up to me and he says, "I'd like to say something to you." So I braced. He said, "All right-thinking people in this country support you and your nation." I said, "Thank you very much." I just flew in from Israel yesterday morning. I'm very, very pleased to hear somebody say that to me, and tell other people that as well, because everyone has to hear it. I want to thank everybody for their participation. Rabbi Pesach, I'm going to hand back over to you for concluding remarks. And you also tell me what to do. I'm used to.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, David, for doing this. And I want everyone to know that here we dealt with a lot of the bigger concepts of how you do this advocacy. And I hope that you paid close attention. We will be making all the materials available. And as well, this webinar, if you want to review it, will be available for you to review and to share with other people. I also just put up a donate button here. The main purpose of this webinar was not fundraising. It was to arm you so that you could be a warrior for Israel. But what we have launched here since the war started, it's kind of a rapid way to build a grassroots movement. We've launched Israel365 Action, and this is our first event today. But this war effort and the videos that we make, if you've been following them, and the other materials we're putting out, it does have a cost. So please, if you could hit that donate button and help us continue this work, that's a big part of what we're doing. Don't feel that you're not participating if you don't, but if you have the wherewithal to do that, it's a big part of what we're doing. Over the course of the coming days and weeks, we will continue to share with you through email, and we're going to create also a WhatsApp action group, and we'll be in touch with you about that so that we can feed you things that you need to share. Remember, in the information war, the main thing is just being a foot soldier and pushing things out so more people than you see it. So we will sometimes be sending you a piece of information. We might be sending you a video to share or just some talking points that you should be aware of. Please make sure to be on your guard. Please make sure to pray every day. Throughout the state of Israel, synagogues are praying Psalm 83 since this war started. It's the psalm that's also recited at the funeral of every fallen Israeli soldier. So that's a great way for you spiritually to stand alongside Israel, is to add that to your prayers. There will be further webinars. This is not the last you're going to be seeing of David Olesker. He's someone that, as I said, he's not only someone who mentored me many years ago, but he also is continuing to work with us behind the scenes in terms of formulating our talking points so that we're making the best arguments about the issues at hand. If you have specific questions or situations come up, you're talking to someone and they say something and you want to know, this is a dynamic relational movement. Be in touch with us. Let us know what you encountered. Say, oh, I met someone. I was arguing with someone. They said this. What do I do? I didn't, or we will continue to arm you to do this. So once again, I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Dean Michelle Bachman, Pastor Doug Reed, member of Knesset Sharon Haskell, and of course our keynote speaker, David Olesker. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. Folks, Israel is in a perilous situation right now. And as you know, we need you. David talked about flying flags and being out there and giving that pro-Israel message. Part of this is also having events. Our enemies have taken over the street. They're out there in the downtown areas and on the college campuses. We need to take over the street as well. One of the initiatives that we're going to be launching in the coming days, and we've already started doing it, but we're going to be using you as our army to continue to do it, is to beat the left at their own game. What I mean by that is that throughout America now, our enemies are being emboldened and they're having events. They're sometimes booking hotels or convention centers to have anti-Israel, pro-Hamas events. We want to start outing these people. We want to start pressuring the convention centers and hotels that are hosting these things to cancel them. We were successful in canceling 3 such events already. And sometimes we'll be giving you action items of who to call so that you can call a hotel and say, how could you be hosting a pro-terrorism event and pressure them. Businesses do respond to pressure. That's an example of some of the things we're going to be doing. We're going to be sharing information about college campuses, academics, and businesses that are openly supporting our enemies so that you're aware of who to raise awareness about and who to boycott. And we're going to be fighting this battle, this information war. We're going to be fighting it. It's a knife fight every day. That's what this is. So thank you for participating in this. But this is only the preparation. The battle takes place outside this webinar, and each and every one of you, as you participate, you will also know that when it's all over and you stand before God, you will be able to answer what you did when Israel was under attack. And thank you for doing that. God bless you, and we'll see you at our next event. So please hit that donate button. We'll keep the webinar open for a couple more minutes, so you can please help us out here so that we can keep making this happen. I see that people are giving. I see the clicks are going up. So before you leave the room, whatever it is, small amount, large amount, whatever you can do to help us continue with this activism, with this effort, we depend on you. So thank you very much. We'll leave it open. We have 2 more minutes, and we'll leave it open for that. Thank you so much. I see the clicks going up. God bless all of you. God bless every person who's sewing into this work. Again, we will be sending out the PowerPoint slides from David's presentation if you want to review them, and watch for more talking points coming in the coming days. Thank you again, everyone who's helping support this work, helping support what we're doing. I see the clicks are going up. Already 26 people have clicked through to give. 27 people, it keeps going. So before you leave the room, please, it's like dropping something in the basket before you leave. Please do that on your way out, and God bless you. And hopefully next time we'll have double the number of people. Tell others about it. This is the way to be engaged. This is the way to be engaged for Israel and for the ultimate battle that we are fighting. This is, it's a difficult time, folks. And we need every single one of you. I'm going to remind you again also, when I introduced Doug Reed at the beginning, each week on Israel365, you can find my podcast, or you can find it on any podcast platform, the Shoulder to Shoulder podcast. It's a great resource during this war. We're bringing on experts of various kinds, military experts, IDF spokespeople, but also talking about the spiritual side of the war. We're sharing information. In the episode that we released yesterday, which is the newest episode, we actually go through 3 key points of Israel advocacy about this war. So it's kind of based on the principles that you heard here today. It's 3 specific issues that we deal with. We deal with the narrative of defining Hamas, because Hamas is not freedom fighters. Hamas is ISIS terrorists, and we need to win that narrative. One way we can win that narrative is sharing the information. There's a video that we have put out called Who is Hamas? If you haven't seen it yet or haven't shared it, go to Israel365's YouTube channel and find the Who is Hamas video and share it with everyone you know. Or you could go to the Israel365 News Twitter account and you'll find it there as the pinned post. This is a very important video, and it makes the case that Hamas is essentially the equivalent of ISIS. That's one narrative point we deal with in the podcast. The second one we dealt with is the issue of proportionality. You're hearing a lot of talk about that Israel's response is disproportionate. David mentioned it earlier, but we go through the talking points of how to make the case for Israel in this current conflict on the topic of proportionality. And finally, we also deal with the larger issue of this claim that Israel is occupying someone else's land, that it's Palestinian land. Which again, we didn't get into in this webinar. Here we were talking more about the larger approach to advocacy, but there will be upcoming webinars. Watch for them, where we're going to get into some specifics about issues that we're facing in this war. Because the point of this is not only to educate ourselves, but as the title of this webinar is to arm us so that we can fight this battle. So God bless you all. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.